James, welcome to the show.
It's very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. James, I'm in the midst of reading a number of books on Alexander the Great. Probably one of the greatest generals that you've probably studied in your career who's ever lived. But in particular, I'm drawn to the tactics, his use of speed, communication, propaganda, the scribes supporting all this, his use of new technologies, his engagement of mercenaries, special ops teams, and the driving forces behind everything, fear and greed. And I guess really just to start things, I sort of wonder what's changed over the last 2,300 years when I look at today's geopolitical landscape. Now, James, you've advised presidential candidates. You've provided national security expertise at presidential level for domestic and international campaigns. You've advised on Joint Special Operations Command. You're an expert on cyber and a student of leadership and an author of numerous books, which I'm sure we're going to cover a couple today. So maybe just to start the ball rolling, can I just ask you your assessment of today's current world events? And I'm going to ask you in terms of leadership, effectiveness, bearing in mind your experience and your expertise. Maybe just if you want to maybe just to start, just an open question, James. Where is the world at the moment?
The world is a ship that is adrift, looking for a course to steer. It is a chaotic world. It is a changing world, of which I think you could argue that one of the more important features, if you look at states, is that we've moved from a bipolar to a multipolar world. There is no dominant state today as there was during the Cold War, when you
Yeah.
just had Russia and China. So that I think is one thing. The second thing is that when you look at the digital revolution, connectivity and nodes are two of the defining characteristics that deal with communication and how people are going to deal with each other. I
Mhm.
mean, for example, every living room in an irregular warfare is a battlefield because the struggle to cognitively influence audiences at home watching news is just as intense in a lot of ways in some conflicts as kinetic warfare, people shooting at each other.
Now, hold on,
That's
hold on.
all
Just start on that. What was the first term you used? Irregular warfare. All right. To those
irregular
out there,
warfare.
what does that mean?
Well, instead of having two armies facing each other, such as you had, say, at Jena during the Napoleonic era,
Yep.
you have what some people might think of as guerrilla forces, or we might use special operations, and they're doing conflict that is short of a general war. Short of war is not a defined term, but short of all-out armed warfare, and we see it in it's a tactic that the Russians like to use in Europe.
Mhm.
Uh, it was a tactic in World War II that both sides used. There's nothing new about it.
Mhm.
It's been used throughout history. Uh, People give all these things new names, but I think the nature of warfare has not changed much, although the tools for fighting it have. Clausewitz, as you know,
Yeah.
Karl von Clausewitz, the great philosopher, wrote a book in 1832 called On War. It's a philosophical book that was not finished, but and it's impenetrable in some ways, but in other ways, it's very astute in describing the nature of warfare. And the precepts that he has described in there over almost 2 centuries ago, I think still hold, although the modalities by which people may pursue armed conflict have changed a whole lot. Technology has changed.
So is data a weapon in that sense?
Cyber is a characteristic of it, and if you think about it, you need to go beyond that and think about battle spaces in which warfare has been conducted. We think of domains, the maritime domain, ships, the air, the air domain for
Yep.
aircraft, the
Yep.
ground for that. The coming domain and Chinese sixth generation warfare doctrine is really focused on this better, I think, than anybody else's, is going to be the impact of artificial intelligence and quantum computing on how you do what, when, and where. And nobody really knows what the ramifications for all of that are. We're still learning about artificial intelligence. I think that artificial intelligence is the scariest development in the history of humanity. Um, right now, you see how quickly chat box can give you an answer to a problem. Maybe the wrong problem, but you ask them a question, and 10 seconds later you have an answer. So let's say that you've got an artificial intelligence today with I don't know, a 400 IQ. I don't think there are any human beings that have a 300 IQ. How would you like to deal with an AI that's got a 20,000 IQ? What would that look like? It's called super intelligence. Nobody has any idea what that would look like. I find it scary. Why would a machine that has a IQ of 20,000 IQ, what use would they have for us? What values, if any, would such a machine have? What impact would it have? You almost have to go to science fiction
Yeah, right.
to look at some of the speculation, although there are very good philosophers like Ray Kurzweil and people like that that are grappling with these problems, but nobody knows the answers to these things. But I raise it because that's where it's going. And this is going to change everything in terms of the way that people and states relate to one another. It'll change warfare, it'll change diplomacy, it'll change economics, it'll change cultures and societies. It'll probably change values. We don't know what the future looks like. And in some ways it's exciting, and in some ways it's really frightening.
Who who's got the advantage at the moment?
The United States and China. The thing to remember when you read news stories about the digital capabilities of both nations is that they are very closely held secrets. And neither one of them is transparent or candid, nor should they be, about their capabilities. My impression is that the United States is actually ahead of China, but I don't know. If you go to the Pentagon and ask them, uh, they'll take out a gun and shoot before they answer you. It is really held very closely, and one
Okay.
can hardly blame them for that.
Okay. So bearing on what's happening at the moment, we've seen tariffs, we've seen, you could arguments in, is it, are we in a trade war? Are we in an economic war? There's movements obviously in traditional warfare as well in certain fronts. Where's that all headed?
Well,
Who's winning? Who's
let's take
losing?
tariffs because tariffs is something that is top of mind for a lot of
Yeah.
people. Um, I think the thing that one needs to remember when you look at what President Trump is doing is that he's unpredictable. It's a purposeful unpredictability that he likes to use as a negotiating tactic.
Yeah.
Today, it was revealed after everybody was saying, "Oh my heavens, what's going to happen to us?" Well, it turns out that they've been negotiating, and we don't know the details of what will happen between, say, India or China and the United States. But I think it's safe to say that nobody has an interest in seeing the economies of other nations or their own collapse. And so, what's different about Donald Trump is that there's never been a president like him,
Mm.
uh, but he revels in being unpredictable. You really don't know. He does not disclose his strategies ahead of time. He loves to spring things on people, and that's just his mo. And he's got everybody. Everybody is responding to him right now, and you have to say that's a pretty astonishing achievement. I mean, he's got everybody asking, "What does Donald Trump think?" as opposed to making Trump think, "What does everybody else think?" And I think that is, for a political leader, is pretty amazing. I haven't seen a political leader do that. Whether you agree or disagree with him, it's an amazing talent.
So for someone who's advised presidential candidates in terms of their strategy, in terms of the communication policy or strategy, well, how would you sum up Trump in that regard? I know I got your point because unbelievable how he does it, no doubt about it, and the world has come to him. Did exceptionally well in business. Does it always work on the world stage?
All I can say is that he's dominant today on the world stage. Trump as a candidate is different from other candidates in one really critical respect, and that is that he's his own strategist. I'm reading Jonathan Allen's book, Fight, which is about the 24 election. It's a great
Yes.
book.
Yeah, just recently released. Yeah.
It's one of the points that they're making when they were commenting on Susie Wiles, who was his manager, that she realized that the best way to deal with Trump is to figure out where he wants to go and make sure that the campaign adjusts to him rather than have the candidate adjust to what the campaign thinks it ought to be doing. He's a very instinctive politician, and people have underestimated him forever. I mean, nobody, when he ran for president in 2016, took him seriously. Allen wrote a wonderful book. I forget the name of it about the 16 election, and I was slightly bemused by it because, and that book is told mostly from the point of view of the Clinton campaign and what was going on inside that.
Hmm.
But apparently, I'm just channeling what he wrote. That the first time that the Clinton campaign took Donald Trump seriously was when they sat down to prepare for the first debate.
Yeah,
And they
right.
realized two things. The first thing was they didn't have a message, and they didn't. Her slogan was, I'm with her. Uh, and they also realized, to their shock, that while Trump looked like he was in chaos, he actually had a message. The Make America Great notion meant something to the people that he was appealing to, and it was resonating. So there they are preparing for their debate. She's got no message that they could settle on, and they never came up with one in the campaign. And he had a very coherent one. He did not get that from consultants. He came up with it himself. That there are very few politicians that are really able to do that. Uh, Reagan, in a very different way, did that.
Mm.
Reagan was very consistent throughout his career. He had three themes that he was interested in, especially when he became president. He wanted to cut the size of government, number one. Number two, he wanted to lower taxes. And number three, he wanted to defeat communism. Uh, that wasn't something that he got from a poll. That's just who he was. And I think one of the reasons he was popular and very effective and attracted so many talented people is that he had a sense of purpose. He had a strategic view of the world. He had a positive view of humanity, not a negative one. And he had guts. He was prepared to act on it, and he was very measured in the way that he did it. His uh, disclosure at Reykjavik to Gorbachev that we were going to do what was it, Star Wars
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, because one of the things that Gorbachev realized is that in a repressive dictatorship, you don't have uh, scholarship and research and development that can keep pace with what happens in a free society. And Gorbachev suddenly realized that technologically, when you looked ahead where the world was going and the role that technology would play, he realized that Russia was going to lose. And I think that's the thing, more than anything, that caused Gorbachev to ask himself, where is the Soviet Union and what are we going to do now?
Communication style. Reagan was
It
an
all
eloquent,
is.
eloquent,
A lot of that is.
eloquent speaker, engaged the audiences exceptionally well, motivated a nation in many regards too. Now, President Trump is a very different speaker, speaks in quite simple language a lot of the time, repetitive what he does. As someone who's an expert in communication, is that obviously it's an effective way? What are your thoughts? And also, what are your thoughts in terms of leadership? How does one communicate?
Well, let's talk about Trump first. He's
Yeah.
such an interesting figure of history. Um, he's unique. There just isn't anybody uh, that I can think of that has been like him. His approach to communication works for him. It's not an approach that I think would necessarily or even possibly work for somebody else. Um, he is uh, somebody who operates very much on instinct.
Mm.
Uh, he can walk in and he can read a room very well. He draws energy from crowds that he speaks to. That's very important. A lot of politicians are drained by crowds. He draws energy from them. And I think that in terms of dealing with politics, I think he enjoys what he's doing, especially in the second term, because I think he feels like he's had 4 years to think about what would work and what wouldn't work. And so he's a far more effective leader in his second term than he was in his first term. He learned from his experience. Um, but Trump's view is fine if we create chaos because actually a calm thinker in the middle of chaos. And while everybody is running around with their hands in the air, I'm sitting back here figuring out what my next move is going to be. And that's why I'm saying it's dangerous for people to predict what Trump is going to do or not to do. He will seem to be doing something in one direction, then he'll quickly change direction. So he says things for effect a lot of times. And that can backfire on you. It's not a foolproof strategy,
Yeah.
but he has proven that he does this very effectively. It's very impressive as a talent. Speaking as a strategic communication specialist.
But as a strategy, okay, as a communication specialist, there's two lots of audience here. Let's say there's the domestic audience, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. The average American, are they enjoying this communication? Then the external audience, in other words, the world, who's finding the unpredictability difficult to deal with, right? What? How do you that Reagan was at least reasonably consistent. The language is similar, but the world language can be very, very different to the domestic language with Trump.
I think the thing that we have to bear in mind domestically is that this country is polarized. It's about divided 50-50.
Yeah, right.
People that like Trump love Trump. Trump can do no wrong. The people that don't like Trump hate him. And he has to walk that tightrope. He won the election and he got the most votes, but it's not like he got 60% of the vote. Uh, I think that he's taken the cards that he's been dealt with and he's played them very adroitly to amass and to consolidate power as an executive. He is a very strong president and a very strong executive. And if you ask me where all of that is going to lead, I don't know. He does. He plays. He talks a lot, but he doesn't really disclose his strategies. He doesn't tell you my goal is X. He wants to keep everybody else off balance and to like moving pieces around a chessboard. So then he'll pounce at a critical point in order to get what he wants. I think that's his MO. And very few people are able to do that, but that's how he operates. He's been very effective at it. In dealing with an international audience, I think it's been different. The thing I think that has struck me the most is the extent to which he has caused the rest of the world leaders to say, what does Donald Trump think? What is Trump going to do next? That is an amazing thing.
Yeah, good point.
Not many people didn't ask, I wonder what Franklin Roosevelt is going to do, or what's John Kennedy going to do, or even what Ronald Reagan is going to do next. All of whom, in their own ways, were, I think, very effective leaders on the international stage. Um, and in terms of where Trump wants to go with this, he's not entirely clear, except that he has made, I think, this clear, and that is that he feels that the United States has been overstretched, that we have gotten into too many conflicts, too many things that are really not our business and are not vital to our national security interests. And we are financially in debt and we have problems here at home. And he just doesn't feel as if we should be the world's policeman and telling everybody else what to do and how to do it. And that's not, although people jump on him, if you look at a lot of the polling that was done, especially when the global war on terrorism started,
Yeah.
there was a lot of polling about how people perceived the United States. And one of the things that came through the loudest to me was that other nations were tired of the United States telling them what to do. They wanted to make their own decisions. And that actually aligns fairly closely with what I think is Trump's worldview. So on the one hand, his style tends to get people excited. But on the other hand, the underlying dynamic that seems to me to motivate him is surprisingly in line with where I think a lot of countries want. Now, they don't know what he's going to do or how what he's going to do affects them, and that rattles them. But again, I think that's part of the way that Trump likes to operate. That's right. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. So here's what right now I think I want you to do. And he's managed to get people to go along. He's gotten a lot done. Whether you agree or disagree with him, but he's gotten a lot done. And it's an impressive achievement.
If he pulls out to certain parts of the world, i.e., that space is then left to others in some cases, which vacuums get filled. There's another country which is, in challenging time, a place called China. But this China is also building extensive, or supposedly building extensive relationships. And maybe if I roll it forward 20 years, James, has the Trump movement been a smart move if you allow that gap to be filled by the likes of China and other parties?
One of the things that I like about Trump's approach to national security, echoed by Albert Colby, who's his undersecretary for policy. For people that don't know, the way the Pentagon is organized is like this, just to take a second. You have a Secretary of Defense whose job is not to run the Pentagon. His job that's a political position. It's to deal with Congress, the media, the White House, the political aspects of what the Pentagon has done. The Secretary of Defense is not the guy you go to say, okay, boss, we're now in a war. What's our strategy for winning it? That's not his job. The Deputy Secretary of Defense is the one who is like the chief operating officer. He keeps the trains running on time inside the Pentagon. And then the Pentagon is managed through a handful of what's called undersecretaries, of whom I would suggest probably the most important is the Undersecretary for Policy. And that is Albert Colby right now, who has, if anybody wants to know where he's coming from, he's written a very good book called The Strategy of Denial, in which he lays out very clearly his priorities and where he thinks the United States should go. So that if somebody really wants to know how we're going to approach China and what our worldview on China is, I would strongly recommend that they read Colby's book. I enjoyed the book. I sent him, this is before I actually even knew who he was, sent him a note and said I thought the book was very interesting. And he politely sent me a note back. Colby's view is that China is what he calls the pacing threat. China is the most important and most powerful competitor for the United States on the world stage. And it is a global competitor versus just a regional competitor. And this becomes important because when you look at strategy, the questions you want to ask are what should our relationship be with another country? Should we be focused, for example, on what it should be in a regional way? Should the United States focus on how we should deal with China in Asia? Or should our overall policy with China be more globally focused? Colby's view, as I understand it, is that when you're dealing with a rising power like China, you have to do both. You have to have a strategy for dealing with them regionally and a strategy for dealing with them globally. And I think that's the right perspective. Regionally, there are two aspects to what he talks about. One of them is the need for us to keep pace with our what we would call our warfighting capacity, our ability to build ships, with planes or drones or all these other things, so that we're competitive with China. China right now builds ships at a rate of 6 to 1 compared to the United States. I mean, their navy is growing like a weed, and we're not even in the game in terms of that. Not only that, but among the ships that we have, we don't have enough people to even man a lot of these ships.
Yeah, right.
He is right in saying, hey guys, we have a lot of things we could spend money on, but our priority needs to be dealing with with China because that's the one that is our competitor. And the second thing that he talks about, and I think he's absolutely right about this, is the need to have partners in the region. It's not a question of can the United States counter China. It's can we put together partnerships with everybody from India, South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, Japan,
And
Indonesia, the Philippines. It's the collective partnerships working together that have a better chance to check Chinese uh, imperialism. Now, let's look at it from China's point of view. Uh, China has always had this paranoia about being surrounded, uh, and when you look at its right the doctrines that its experts put out, it's clear that they're worried about that. The way that they posture themselves is somewhat disingenuous. What China would say is, we want mutual partnerships with everybody. And we're not interested in being expansive. All we want to do is to defend our territory. Well, that sounds perfectly reasonable, except you then ask a dumb question like, uh, President Xi, when you say your territory, what exactly does that mean?
mm,
Well, you look at the way they're building these artificial islands and putting bases on them, and suddenly you realize that the definition of Chinese borders is expanding, and that China really is very imperialistic. The difference between China and, let's say, Russia,
mhm,
who looks at international relations in terms of real estate, uh, it always has since 1547. It always has. Putin is not new. His interest in Ukraine is not novel for Russia. Let's just set that aside. Uh, but they basically, the Soviet Union was subjugating other people. They wanted to run other countries. That's not the way that China looks at life. China has a much more sophisticated approach to power, and it's rooted in, a smart country should be, in economics. It has what's called the China Dream uh, for 2050, 100 years after China won its independence and was no longer a colony. And that dream envisions China as the global leader economically, with all other countries as economic tributaries. In other words, instead of having a rules based international order, one in which, for example, values like freedom of the press are preeminent, they want to have a world in which everybody wants to go to China and China gets to set the rules. And when you say, oh, well, like, what are the rules? I mean, that a ship can't go 45 miles an hour? No. Uh, an example of rules that would matter would be the effort that China makes to push products from Huawei, which we think of as cell phones.
yep,
If Huawei or other Chinese technology is what people are buying, then China gets to decide what the technical standards of the world will be. And that gives it, by definition, an advantage over the competition. Because if you're buying an iPhone, which has a different technical standard from what Huawei does, well, then you've got to make a decision here. If you're going to use Huawei, then you're going to use their technical standards. If you're going to use iPhone, I'm not a technical person, but I'm using this as an example. Um, well, then they're automatically at an advantage. And they have a policy in working towards their 2050 dream that is aimed at putting them in a position in which they're dominant in deciding what the technical standards are. They are dominant in deciding, let's say, what tariffs should be on other countries. They are dominant in deciding, um, who should get rare earth minerals, which they have a monopoly on in some ways. And they don't doctrinally think that if they have to go into armed conflict to achieve these goals, they have lost. Sun Tzu always basically said, you win by not fighting. You,
yeah,
you sort of put the pieces in place and use economic policy, diplomacy, uh, politics. The military is there to back you up. Completely different point of view from the Western point of view. Warfare for the West is about armed conflict. Warfare for China is not about armed conflict. And so when you look at China, I think one needs to take that in mind. China, in my opinion, has and I'll stop talking so you can ask questions.
No, no, keep going.
I
I'm
think
interested
that
if you want
China
to comment.
has a very sophisticated notion of what it's doing. The lucky thing for us is it's not very good at what it does. It has something called the Belt and Road Initiative,
Hmm.
in which it goes to, let's see, Sri Lanka. It all went to Sri Lanka and said, "We will lend you the money to build a brand new port." And everybody in Sri Lanka said, "Boy, this is great. Thanks to China, we're going to have a new port." Well, it was a poison chalice because the terms of the loan were terms that Sri Lanka couldn't meet, so they couldn't repay the loan. And get this, and this is the thing that is so amazing to me, they require you to use Chinese labor. Essentially, they're loaning you money to put their people to work, not to put people in Sri Lanka to work. Well, sure enough, Sri Lanka defaulted on its loan, and China took possession and ownership of its port. And you see this pattern.
But
I
that,
mean,
but
the
hold on,
work.
you said but that's not silly. That's pretty smart, isn't it?
It's what
That's very smart, isn't it?
of them? Sure,
Absolutely.
it is.
You know,
Yeah, it's stupid of Sri
they're
Lanka.
employing their own people. They're winning. They're getting influence in the country, and they're getting a substantial asset as a result.
Hats off to China for coming up with the strategy.
Yeah, and then why
That's
and
what
why
we're,
the
but
and
when
why is the
Colby
country?
says
But they're all
we
falling
have a
for it.
wasting threat from China, that's what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. But
Not an,
it's not a dumb
not
play. It's a
just a
smart
matter
play, isn't it?
of they have more warships than we do. You have a lot of different fronts,
Yeah.
and you've got to define, what are we talking about here? Is this competition? Is this rivalry? Or is this an adversarial relationship that at some point could tip into a war? And I don't think that question has really been thought through yet or answered. And I think one of the good things about having Colby in that position is that he's somebody that's focused on developing policies that will answer these questions.
So the tariff effect to China, form of warfare in that sense, then, as a
Does
part of
what?
is that a form of warfare in that sense? In sense of if you play it longer term, does China need America more than America needs China?
Who knows? You could make the case that economically the economies have so much interdependence that the idea of separating one from the other and disentangling one from the other, though it works as a theory, I'm not an economist, so I can't in any expert way really answer your question. But my impression is that you sort of pick your battles. There are certain things where we're just going to be commingled because, for practical reasons, it makes sense. I mean, we want their rare earth. We don't have any rare earth. They have, I think, 6 rare earth minerals right now that they're not exporting to the United States through all of this controversy. I mean, you can't go to a 3D printing machine and make the stuff. So I
That's
think
right.
the idea that the two nations would be completely separate and isolated and stuff like that is not likely. I think what you want to do is to find a balance so that you can contain China within measurable parameters and in ways that protect the sovereignty, and that's the key word here, the sovereignty of other nations, their independence, uh, but at the same time, avoid getting into the middle of a war that would savage everybody. There's no advantage to having a war. And it's one of the reasons that ultimately I'm not so sure that we're going to ever have a war over Taiwan. I'm not sold on that proposition. China rattles its saber all the time. But the cost to everybody of having a war over Taiwan would be huge. And anybody that says, let me tell you what's going to happen if we have that war, in my view, is just engaging in pure speculation. Warfare is unpredictable.
Mm.
Clausewitz said basically there are 3 things that define the nature of warfare. He didn't use this language; he uses other language, but in layman's terms, it's uh, having the will of the people behind you. You can't fight a war unless everybody's with you. And historically, we know that that's true. That's why let's go back to World War II. When Franklin Roosevelt was not just a political genius, he was a military genius. He understood in a way that nobody on his uh, staff of advisors, and that includes George Marshall and Eisenhower and MacArthur and all of them. He understood that Germany wanted world domination. He also understood that Japan did. We more or less stumbled into an avoidable war with Japan in World War II. We should have avoided that, and we could have. Uh, and I think it was unfortunate that war took place. That's another topic, but suffice to say, that's what happened.
Yeah.
He always understood that Hitler was really the problem. And the other side of that problem, and I'm coming back to the will of the people here, was that Americans did not want to go to war again. Nobody really wanted to have another world war. Nobody in Europe wanted to have one. If you asked what was the emotion that Europeans between the two world wars most felt most often on a daily basis, the word was fear. There was no scene and nobody knew what was going on. All they knew was they didn't want to have another world war because the last one had torn everybody apart and they were scared to death about what was going to happen and they didn't know. And Americans did not want to get into a war. So faced with Hitler's ambitions to conquer the world, and there's lessons that apply beyond World War II, they apply today. So Roosevelt had that problem, and which was, how am I going to get the American people to support me if we decide to go to war with Germany? Because he understood that you cannot go to war unless the people of a country are with you.
Yeah.
You don't just say, I'm the president, we're going to go to war. I mean, Stalin could do that, but an American president and somebody in a democracy can't do that. You've got to rally everybody to be behind you. So he came up with two things that were important. One of them was the four freedoms, the freedom from fear, the freedom from hunger, and so on, freedom to worship. And the other thing was he found out that because Germany was inhabited by white middle class people, the Americans did not believe that Germans could be capable of the atrocities that they committed. So that going to war against Germany, if you were going to get the American people behind you, you could not fight Germany. You could not fight the German people. You had to fight Hitler and the Nazis. So in World War II, Roosevelt built up support for the war by saying, we're not fighting Germany or the German people. We're fighting these evil Nazis. And then he came up, this is worth talking about because it's such an example of genius. He knew that if he gave a speech to the American people as a political leader and said, you can't believe what the Germans are doing to the Jews in Eastern Europe, it's just beyond anything you can imagine. He was right. It was beyond anything the American people could imagine. They would never have believed that Germany was slaughtering tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So he came up with another idea, and he came up with it. This wasn't something his advisors came up with. The probably most capable advisor that Hitler had was a guy named Heinrich, an SS leader, who had gone to Czechoslovakia to sort of help subjugate them. And the British decided to assassinate him, which they did. And the Germans retaliated by massacring a few hundred people in a couple of villages. And when you're talking about a few hundred people, Roosevelt said, that the American people would believe. So he didn't put himself on the front line. He got Einstein and I'm having a senior moment here. Edward R. Murrow and people like that, and put them on the radio and said, you wouldn't believe the atrocity that Hitler committed in Czechoslovakia. Folks, we cannot let this stand. Let's go get him. And everybody said, yeah, He's a bad guy. And then Roosevelt came up with the invasion of North Africa so that Americans would have skin in the game. And so that's how he brought people with him. He knew that if he didn't do that, if he didn't have the will of the people with him, he couldn't go to war. When George H.W. Bush went to war in 1991, Operation Desert Storm, he knew that he had to have the American people behind him. How did he do it? He did not demonize the people of Iraq. He demonized Saddam.
Saddam.
So everybody said, yeah, Saddam's an evil guy. Let's go get that bastard. And that's how he put together an international coalition. He said, we're going to get Saddam and then we're all going home. So everybody said, so this is not some plan for U.S. domination of the Middle East. He said, no, we're going to get Saddam and then we're going home, which is exactly what he did. When George W. Bush went into Iraq, he followed the same lesson, basically did the same thing. He demonized Saddam for having nuclear weapons. He was factually wrong about whether the guy had it. But be that as it may, he took the time to do it. He went to Congress. He got authorization to go to war against Saddam, and he did it. And one of the many problems that Biden had with the way he mishandled Ukraine was that his idea of getting everybody behind you was getting the leaders of 24 states. He had a very elitist view of what getting people behind you was. He never bothered to get the American people behind him. And I think that he paid a stiff price for it. So the will of the people is the first thing that you think of. It's why Putin spends so much time on propaganda to the Russian people to get the Russian people to support what he does. Putin is the strong man in Russia, but he's not like Stalin. He doesn't have anything close to the power or the authority that Stalin does. What people in Moscow and St. Petersburg, especially, and in these however many people are that comprise the Slovakia, the elites,
Yeah.
what they think actually matters. And he has to be responsive to these people. So Putin, too, has wrapped his war in the colors of patriotism. So when we talk about the nature of warfare, that's the first thing. The second thing, really the third thing, is that you have to have a cause to fight for. Why are we going to war? Are we going to war because some politician wants to have some more territory? Generally speaking, that's a really bad idea if you want to get everybody to support you. You've got to have a cause that is greater than yourself, some kind of patriotic thing, whether it's freedom or you name it. And then the third thing that Clausewitz talks about is what he calls the frictions of war, that is to say, the unpredictability of warfare. And so as you think about what might happen and where we go, it's well not to focus too much on the technology, the tools that by which you might use to advance your interest, but to understand the nature, the dynamics of what we're dealing with. It's like changing the furniture in your house won't change your life. I mean, your life is what it is. The dynamics of warfare are what they are. And unless you deal with that in a practical and I think realistic way, I think you're not likely to achieve your objectives. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does. So just on the bearing in mind what you said that you don't think both parties from the China or US wish to go to war, how would you sum up the leadership then and the communication style of President Xi? First, we just mentioned we went through Trump. He operates very, very differently.
She is a fascinating figure. There's no question that in terms of internal party politics, he's been a home run hitter. I mean, he's got control of the party. He's got control of the military, the government. Let me just stop for 1 second, since we're talking to an audience of laymen and not military people. There is no, quote, government of China as we would think of it. There is the Chinese state, and then there is the Communist Party. Xi is the general secretary of the party, and he's also the president. The People's Liberation Army is not the army of the Chinese government. It is the army of the Communist Party. In other words, you've got two totally parallel things at play when you think about China and how it operates. And when you ask me, what kind of a leader is Xi? In terms of getting control over the party, he's obviously been an ace. He's done it. In terms of getting control over his government from the outside, I mean, we're not in China and we don't know what happens behind the scenes.
Hmm.
It looks to me like he's got control. It used to be that the standing committee of the Politburo, which had varying numbers, but let's just say a dozen people or so, um, prior leaders were like chairman of the board. They were the first among equals, but they had to get a consensus among the other people in the Politburo. It looks like Xi doesn't have that. It looks to me like Xi's got control over all of that, and what he wants to do is good. So, in terms of his ability to operate internally with the state and the party, he's obviously a very smart and very effective fellow. That said, I don't find Xi to be the Superman that a lot of people try to depict him as being.
Okay.
I think he's a very deeply emotional and impulsive individual. I think that he is an irrational individual, and he's made a lot of really bad decisions. Let's use two of them that I think are signal examples. And I just need to say this: I'm an American, speaking as an American, and my views are colored by, you know, the way that I look at the world as an American. I don't look at the world the same way that they do.
Hmm.
So take what I'm about to say and discount what I'm saying, because what matters isn't what I think, but what he thinks. Now, where do I think are two examples that, looked at from his point of view, that he has made an unbelievable set of blunders? COVID. China mishandled the COVID crisis about as badly as they could have done. It's I'm not an expert in this area, but from everything I read, it looks to me like uh, that virus came from the Wuhan lab. It got loose. How? I don't know. But apparently that's the case. And all this seems, I say use the word seems because we don't know what we don't know, to have occurred in December of 2019 or 2000. I think maybe it was 19.
Yep.
Um, and they weren't sure really what they were dealing with. But it then spread, and by the end of December, the beginning of the new year, uh, instead of the local party dealing with it, the national party and government had to intervene to find out what was going on. Now, China had to make a decision. Were they going to share everything that they knew, everything that they found, uh, excess medical equipment, you're not everything, you name it, with the rest of the world and try and support the rest of the world's efforts to fight COVID? Or would they instead adopt a set of policies that looked inward to protecting only China's interest at the expense of everybody else? They said, this is going to wreck the economies of a bunch of places. Instead of using their power and knowledge to help support keeping other countries' economies prosperous, they stood by in the hope that it wouldn't. And that is part and parcel of this 2050 doctrine, that we're in this sort of interim period in which the other countries will weaken, and eventually all of this will culminate by 2050 in China being on top. And he opted to let other countries get weak when he could have helped.
Mm.
That blew up in his face. China then tried its own information campaign to say, look how great we are. We're on the cutting edge of technology. We're making this and that available to everybody. And everybody saw through it. Instead of becoming stronger and more credible in the eyes of the rest of the world, I think China became weaker. That was a terrible mistake. He blew an opportunity to strengthen China's standing in the world. And remember this is so critical when you look at Chinese strategy. Seizing and holding the moral high ground is pivotal. It's the foundation to Chinese strategy. Knock them off their moral high ground, and they are, from their point of view, in trouble. And Xi's own decision making did that. Let's use a second example, and that is the competition between the Chinese interest in strengthening the Chinese Communist Party and strengthening its hold on power. Um, I'm not an expert on internal Chinese politics, but friends who are say that although China looks totally solid from outside, that actually the Chinese are terrified that the whole thing could fall apart. I mean, they've got 1.5 billion people. There are different agendas, different parts, and they're not at all confident in their legitimacy. In anything China does, we must always remember that their number one priority is the preservation of the Chinese party and the strengthening of its credibility and its legitimacy with the Chinese people. That's number one. And everything else is number two. And so, from our point of view, they could have an option available to them that would make sense to them. From their point of view, if it doesn't strengthen the party, well, maybe we'll do it and maybe we won't. So let's talk about Hong Kong. Uh, from their point of view, there was a little bit too much dissent brewing in Hong Kong that they thought could spread to the mainland, and it terrified them. Would this, I mean, in the age of the internet, all this stuff could go viral.
Yep.
And so what should they do? Well, their decision was to crack down and be repressive, and they've gotten more so. Just in the last week, they've gotten even more so. But they had another option. I'm going to relate this to Taiwan, which they say is their number one priority. Instead of doing that, they could have respected the treaty that they signed with Britain when Britain gave up its Hong Kong as its colony. Remember, for 100 years,
That's right.
it was going to be one state, two systems.
Yep.
And they abrogated it. They broke that obligation. And instead, they instituted a very repressive regime in Hong Kong. So, fine, they were able to do that. And the people, I guess the Central Committee, are happy. But let's take a look at what the strategic implication of that was. What if, instead of being afraid of democracy in Hong Kong, they worked hard to double down to make the one system, two states, one state, two systems work? Hong Kong had freedom and democracy in a way that was very different from the mainland. Do we think that they could have then gone to Taiwan, where there is a division of opinion about what the relationship of Taiwan to the mainland should be,
Mm.
and say to them, look, we're going to do the same deal with you that we've done with Hong Kong. Look how great this has worked in Hong Kong. You'll be part of basically it's sort of a federation. We're going to do foreign policy and the big stuff. All the stuff you want to do at home is all yours. What if they had taken that approach? I think that there is a good chance that they might have been able to convince, or have been able to convince Taiwan to sign up with China, so that the decision that Xi made, although it was made in the interest of strengthening the grip of the Chinese party and out of insecurity for the party, had huge strategic implications, which could conceivably lead to World War III. I mean, this is not a small thing. This is a big decision that has potentially big ramifications. And I don't think that Xi thought this through well enough. And I don't think that he made, from his point of view, especially smart decisions. I think that the way that they've handled their road and their
Unbuilt.
road
Yep.
initiative has been all that smart, because what they could have done was to say, we'll loan you money on favorable terms because we can afford to do it. And we'll help modernize you and create jobs and make you prosperous. And here's what we want in terms of trade for advantages and things like that.
Yeah,
And we'll
okay,
put
right.
your people to work instead of our people to work. If the Road and Belt Initiative had done that, and remember that the quality of work that they've done in Africa sucks.
Yep.
It's not like they've created a gleaming paradise. They gave them bad terms, which turned into a debt trap, and they haven't delivered in terms of the products, which has not made them uniformly popular. That's an opening for people that want to do strategic communication to discredit and delegitimize China and Africa, which nobody is taking advantage. Europe and America are not taking advantage of it, and I think that's something that we ought to do as we look to the future. I think it's a vulnerability that they have. So all I'm saying is that when you evaluate Xi, I think that tactically he's been very good at consolidating his power at home, and I don't think that he is a particularly wise leader. I think some of his predecessors have been smarter at what they've done. And so it's funny because the image of him as being a Superman is, I think, probably misguided in many ways. No, if you say, so where does that lead in Taiwan? The answer is nobody knows.
Mm.
Um, the I think that the Pentagon is run about. This is all in the newspaper. Run some. I've read 20 war games or something like that that show that China wins all of these games if there were a war. But since nobody has ever disclosed the details, we have no idea how those games were played or what factors determined the outcome or who did what. Uh, my feeling, and I'm not I was in the Army decades ago, but I don't express professional opinions on military strategy. So if I talk about the military, I'm speaking. This is the peanut gallery speaking, not a professional. I'm a professional at information warfare, cognitive, and in the whole cognitive domain, or cyber. I can talk as a professional, but not as a. If you said, Farwell, how are we going to take this castle? I'm not the one that you would ask.
Well, what about China in
I would
turn?
say that my knowledge of that comes from watching James Bond movies.
Well, what about
Um,
then? But you are an expert in cyber, so what about China's efforts in the cyber war?
Well, I mean, it's going on, and everybody's trying to steal everybody else's secrets. And since we don't publicize what we do, and they don't either, about the only thing we know is that China has been successful in looting a lot of American companies, and I think that we need to do more to crack down on that. But since I don't know exactly what we're doing or not doing, I really can't comment because I would be speaking in a vacuum. I have no clue as to what we're doing. We don't hold press conferences and say, here's what we did last week.
Yeah.
You get press conferences that say those nasty little chinks, you know, they stole plans for our F-35 fighter. But that's all we know. We don't know whether or not our cyber capabilities are stealing secrets for these new planes that China is unveiling. Cyber is such a fascinating field, but you always have to be careful when you read what countries say they are doing or have done about that, because they're not transparent about what they do or what they know. And if I were the one making decisions, I wouldn't be transparent either. There's no reason for me to tell you what we have, what our capabilities have, or what we're doing. I'm happy to talk about what a bad person you are. I'll be happy to put, uh, uh, you know, a forked tail on you. Delighted to do that. But I'm certainly not going to tell you about my angel's wings. I'll just say, of course, we would never stoop to doing such nasty things. Are we? I don't know. And you can't believe anybody who says a thing.
Well, what's going on with the man wanting more real estate, Mr. Putin?
So when we look at Putin's views
Mm.
on Ukraine, I think it's useful to put what Putin is doing into a much broader historical context. I'm not an advocate in what I'm about to say. I'm just describing what I see. Um, Ever since Russia was founded in, what was it, 1547, Russia has always had, through Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, to modern times, two things that Westerners don't always appreciate. And one is border insecurity. So they're constantly trying to get more territory. Now, are they justified? That's neither here nor there. The point is that's the way they see it, and it drives their policy. And the second thing is an inferiority complex. They feel like nobody really respects them. It's interesting to me that the painting behind the wall of Putin's chair, unlike those of his predecessors, which was Lenin or somebody like that, is Peter the Great, who also had that same insecurity. This idea of wanting to have more territory in the name of we need to be secure may not have any merit from our point of view. But again, if you want to understand what drives these guys, that's one of the things that drives their policy, the way it's their worldview,
Mm.
which Putin is merely the latest in a line of leaders and not somebody who has come up with a novel, new idea. Let's go to when the Soviet Union fell. It was very chaotic, as you will recall. It was very excited to watch the wall come down and stuff like that. But the diplomacy was very chaotic. You've got a Russian army of what, 300,000 or 400,000 people in Germany. You've got the Soviet Union literally going bankrupt. I mean, literally going bankrupt. We talk about are we going to have a government shutdown and things like that in this country? You know, that's patty cakes compared to what was going on in the Soviet Union. The communist state failed and it collapsed. And there's Gorbachev trying to figure out what to do. And everybody else is trying to figure out what to do. And the rubber meets the road when you start asking, so, okay, if there's going to be a big change, who's who in the zoo and where do they land? Well, one of the things that was evident and sort of got resolved, this is product of lots of negotiations. I'm simplifying a complicated thing. Was that Czechoslovakia, Poland, and I think Hungary wanted their independence from the Soviet Union. And Gorbachev went along with that. The big debate was what was going to be the fate of Germany. You had West Germany, you had East Germany. Would East Germany become part of West Germany so they're united? Would nuclear weapons be based in Germany? Bear in mind the paranoia that Russia has long had about Germany. Americans may blow that off, but Russians don't. And it's one thing after another. And all of this is very sticky for somebody like Gorbachev, who hardly leads a united government.
Yeah.
He has liberals who want to see Russia throw out communism, get rid of its colonies, let them have their independence, have democracy in Russia, and so on. And you have the state security apparatus, which is very intact, which, to put it mildly, has a very simple view. This is a revolution. Let's stomp them into the ground and be done with all of this. And I don't think many Americans and many people in the West really appreciate just how fragile these negotiations were and the tug of war. But here's what's relevant to Ukraine. All the focus went on what are we going to do about Germany and how far east would NATO extend? That's what the Russians were scared of.
Yep.
Now, Baker, the Secretary of State, very able Secretary of State to Bush, apparently made a verbal commitment to Gorbachev that we would not go further east than Germany.
All right.
All I can say is Gorbachev should have gotten it in writing, because that was not the view that President Bush had. So you see the brouhaha and the hard feelings that were going on, on top of which, literally, Gorbachev was sitting back there saying, I don't have any money to run my government. I need fuel for my airplane. This is an unimaginable situation for Americans, but it was what he was faced with. And sitting off on the side is the fate of Ukraine, to which Russia has always had strong feelings, not necessarily shared by the citizens of Ukraine, and certainly not shared by people in the West. But it doesn't matter. The point is, that's how the Russians felt. And they never really got down to resolving that when those discussions about Germany and NATO were taking place. There was an agreement, I think it was in 1954, in which the independence or sovereignty of Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine was assured. I think that was the word that they used. Not guaranteed.
Okay, assured but not
In other
guaranteed.
words, if you've got a guarantee and somebody invades you, you've got NATO troops coming to your aid. If you have an assurance, you've got a moral pat on the back. This is very important because it again affects how people should have managed expectations. And I would say to you that the European Union, and especially Barack Obama as president, made a hash out of all of it. So let's fast forward to around 2013, 14, when you have all these color revolutions cropping up.
Yep.
From a Western point of view, this is democracy at work, the people rising up and wanting control of their own lives. You know, people like me and probably you think, yeah, that's what was going on. Let's put ourselves in the Politburo and see how we would have looked at it. Our attitude is that goddamn CIA is at it again, you know, stirring up revolutions in the name of democracy. And sure enough, it's going to wind up right here in the Kremlin, riling the Russian people to throw us out of power. That's how they looked at it. And to put it mildly, they were not amused. So now we come to Ukraine, and I think it was in 2013 it started. The question comes up, could Ukraine become an associate member of the European Union? The European Union does a lot of things well, but I would not have described statesmanship as one of them. They were delighted to have Ukraine as an associate member, but they wanted to impose all kinds of conditions on this. And some of these conditions were very onerous to Russia. Now, Putin is sitting back there already thinking that Ukraine should be part of Russia. And here comes the EU with Obama not doing anything constructive about these discussions. And suddenly, Ukraine is getting pressure not only to sort of side with the West, but to cut itself off from this little customs union that Russia's put together with itself and Belarus and I think Kazakhstan. And then you have the Maidan revolution, which overthrows a legitimately elected president who happened to be pro-Russian, and the guy's run out of the country. And Putin is saying, this is bullshit. You know, colleagues I know who are Russians experts have related this to me. I don't hold myself out as a Russian expert. There's a school of thought that I am channeling to you. This is not James Farwell's take on Russia. I'm just channeling to you a school of thought articulated by people that I respect, who have a different view than that Russians are evil monsters who want to conquer the world and everything they want to do is bad and nothing that they want to do has any merit to it. So, you know, that's what would be called the hawkish point of view.
Yep.
And I don't mean it's not merited, but I'm just saying that's one school of thought. But here's the other school of thought, which is they would argue that Putin was willing to put up with the election that was going to take place later, I think 2014.
Yes.
And I get Yushchenko and Yanukovych confused. One was pro-Western, the other was pro-Russian. But anyway, Putin's buddy was going to lose that election. He was okay with that. He was okay with Ukraine becoming an associate member of the EU, providing it also maintained relations with Russia. His attitude was, yeah, you can do business with the West, and be friends with them, but you got to be friends with us too. We got to be, you can't cut us out of the out of the game. We have a seat at the table. And he warned, and he made this clear: if you don't do this, you're going to put me into a position in which I'm going to do something. Well, the revolution went wild, and it was down with the Russians, down with Putin, and all this other stuff. And Putin, after a lot of dithering, people who want to read more about that should read Mikhail Zaykov's book, All the Kremlin's Men. Zykov was the editor of Rain, which was the independent Russian station, and he knows all these guys. And he has a fascinating account, blow by blow, inside account of the decision making before Russia sent its troops into Crimea. It was very chaotic, and Putin was pulled in a lot of different directions and wasn't really sure what to do. And in the end, the people who said, let's go take Crimea, prevailed. And so they did, and then they went to expand that. And so then we wound up in the stalemate of this war that we had. And Obama is sitting there saying, this is terrible. And Putin is genuinely frightened of what Obama is going to do. And he's waiting for the phone to ring. Zykov tells all this. I'm channeling his book.
Mm-hmm.
And according to him, Obama calls him up, and Putin is waiting for the other shoe to drop very anxiously. And Obama says, I don't like what you did in seizing Crimea. I understand, Mr. President, but we think it's the right thing to do, and da, 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 da. And Obama says, well, I'm not going to let this pass. Mr. Putin, I am not going to attend the next G20 meeting with you. Click. And apparently Putin sort of looked around at everybody and said, who is this clown? And it's like, Jesus Christ, the guy's a pancake.
Yeah.
Followed not that long afterwards when Obama sets red lines for Assad and says, you're not going to have chemical weapons. You cross this line and we're going to do something. They have chemical weapons. And what does Obama do? He goes out and plays golf. So now here's Putin, still steaming, still angry in the view of this school of thought, not having a totally illegitimate point of view, given the historical relationship between Ukraine and Russia. But he feels like we're getting screwed. None of these people have any respect for us. They treat us like we're garbage. And I'm sick and tired of this. And so he acts. And because Obama had done nothing, and they had made a hash out of the Maidan revolution, I don't think that Putin really expected the response that he got when he went into Ukraine. I think it was a terrible miscalculation from every conceivable point of view. But anyway, so that puts us into the war. And I have no idea how this war will wind up. If you ask me, what do I think President Trump would do? The answer is that as you would expect, Donald Trump does not reveal his strategy. Doesn't hold press conferences and say, I'm going to do these 5 things over the next 2 weeks unless Putin falls in line. When he says, well, if we can't solve this thing, maybe I'll move on. Don't take any of that seriously. We don't know what Donald Trump's strategy is. It could be all over the board. It could be he decides that he's going to really put the screws to Putin and threaten to go to war full blast, or maybe he will say this is Europe's problem and do something else. We don't know, and I won't comment on what he's doing because I don't know what his strategy is, and I don't think it's appropriate to comment on what somebody's going to do when you're sort of don't have any idea what he's thinking, and that his modus operandi is to mislead you, to make you think he's going to do X when he's thinking Y, so that he'll have a greater impact when he does Y. And I think that's something that, as people begin to evaluate, try and read the tea leaves with Trump, I would just say, I'd be careful about that. People have underestimated Trump for years. And everybody says, the guy's down and out now. He's done. Bankrupted New Jersey. In Jersey City. Well, rises like the phoenix from the ashes. CNN, when he announced for president in 2016, decided not to cover him as a news story, but to have the entertainment division cover him. Now, I don't think, as it happens, that Trump, and I mean this respectfully, I don't think that Trump expected to win the 2016 election.
Yeah.
I think he was as surprised as most people were. He had, according to news reports, he was assuring Melania, who didn't want to go to the White House, don't worry, baby, we're not going to win the election. Back to business as usual next week. But it turned out that he was a candidate that resonated with the American people with a strong message, and he won. Again, I'm just saying that people have gone broke underestimating what the guy's going to do, or predicting that he's going to do one thing when he does the other. And at this point in his career, he understands that. And so he uses this, I think, strategically as a tool to be able to get what he wants. So that's why I'm saying you asked me what I think that Trump will do in Ukraine. The answer is I think that is about as speculative as you can get. He's capable of doing all kinds of different things. And I suspect he's probably, and I'm not sure that he shares that with a lot of people or even his close advisors. I think he internalizes a lot of his own decision making. And it's one of the things that has made him as effective in the current world stage, where everybody is reacting to him. If you're a world leader and they're reacting to you versus the other way around, that's quite an achievement. It really is.
Thanks for watching the No Limitations podcast, brought to you by Blenheim Partners, board and executive search firm. As a trusted advisor, we work with Australian listed groups, multinational corporations, large private companies, and social impact organisations on their most critical people choices to drive change, prepare for growth, and outperform their peers. To learn more about Blenheim Partners and executive search, visit our website, blenheimpartners.com. And now, back to the show. Let me throw something to you, James. You get a phone call. I need you down at the White House. I need you to come. I need you to come to the Situation Room. I want to get your take, because you're an expert in leadership, and you read people and you understand their communication strategies, or you can interpret them. We've got a situation going on, James, with Iran. There's nuclear arms here, potentially. There's nuclear war here, potentially. There's nuclear power. But there's also other things in the Middle East. The place could be a cinderbox, or if we play it smart, James, we could pull this off like The Art of War by Sun Tzu without firing one round. Thanks for coming in, James. Grab that seat there. There's the Joint Chiefs sitting in the room, and there's the President at the end of the table. James, what should we be thinking?
Well, Trump has already given us the answer to that question, having been presented with that choice. And he has opted for diplomacy. His view is that negotiation can lead to a resolution that would satisfy both sides, and that's the direction he's going in. I applaud him for doing that. I think that's the right direction. That's not where Bibi wants to go. He wants the United States to go to war with Iran. And all I can say is I would think twice before I go to war with a country that may already have nuclear weapons. We're not sure about that. But I like the approach that he's taken with Iran. I think he's had two really difficult calls in dealing with Iran. One was what to do when he had the opportunity to take out Soleimani, who was the head of the IRGC, and he made the decision to take him out, which I think was the right decision. And an important thing here is that although, of course, he wasn't a head of state, he was sort of a quasi-head of state. I mean, he ran the IRGC, which was running all of their proxy operations. So that the decision to take him out was a big decision and not lightly considered. But I thought it was the right decision. And then the second decision he's made is right now, which is that he's opted not to launch a bunch of B-1 bomber strikes at Iran and have a war. He has said, I think that I can work this so that we can have a diplomatic solution. We're going to find out whether that works or not, but I think that the judgment that he has made to try it that way is correct, and I support that.
So, what do we think of the real estate next door to Israel? What's going on? What's happening there?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know what to do about Israel. I really don't. I would be, at the, I've advised the Department of Defense, and I don't talk about that work, but I will say this. One thing I said and it's 25 years ago when I first got work was, do not give me any assignments that deal with Israel, because anything I say to anybody will piss off half the people that I'm talking to. And so I don't really comment on what they're doing, whether they're right or whether they're wrong, or I would do something else. I will tell you this: I don't have an answer to the situation that they are in. It is what in national security we would call a wicked problem. The depth of hatred at this point is very deep. John le Carre had remember the
Yeah,
novelist and
yeah,
spy
Greg
novelist,
Writer.
used to
Yeah.
work at my sister, had a great saying. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something like this, which was, before you kill one terrorist, do you think that you might be creating 20 more? And so the question I ask is, and I understand why Israel attacked Hamas, but the question of whether they used the right strategy, the right tactics, we don't know. We're not going to know for a long time. But it's a question I don't think that they asked themselves. And I don't know what their mindset was. I think what they wanted to do was to destroy an enemy who wanted to destroy them.
Yeah.
Uh, but fine. So they've so far been successful militarily, but we don't know what the end game will be. Uh, One thing I think that they did brilliantly was take out Hezbollah. That was an extraordinary triumph of intelligence and military in decapitating Hezbollah. And that did a lot to diminish the chances for a regional war in the Middle East, which would have been a tragedy for everybody. So I would certainly give them gold medals for how they handled Hezbollah. But I don't have an answer to where do you go from here.
But
Um,
do we not have now the rise of ISIS 2.0 effectively in Syria again?
I think that it doesn't look to me like ISIS is going to get an upper hand in Syria. It really doesn't. ISIS looks to me like it's regenerating itself more in Africa.
Mm,
And
okay.
how that is handled by whom, I don't know, because Trump has decided that Africa is not going to be a priority. We see that in the budget for the State Department, and the reorganization of the State Department. Again, I don't know what his strategy is on ISIS or his strategy is on Africa, so I can't comment. I don't know what it is. But I think that ISIS is, especially in Somalia, is a continuing problem. Uh, it's one where I would like to see the Europeans mobilize the African Union to deal with this problem. Every new crisis that comes up in the world should not be on the plate of the United States. One thing that Trump has done, and Trump, although you would think from media attention that all this is him, uh, and it's not, has done is say to Europe, we have carried you for all these years. It's time for you to step up. Um, from some of the news reports, you would think that Trump has turned over the table. The fact is that it was the posture of George W. Bush. It was the posture of Barack Obama. I have no clue as to what Joe Biden thought about it. But the point is that every American president has been annoyed with Europe for free riding.
Yeah.
And Trump is right about that. I mean, Europe really in all of this needs to step up. It needs to arm itself. It needs to take the lead in defining the narratives. It needs to take the lead in helping places like Ukraine, because that's their next door neighbor. And they're the ones that are most at risk if Putin wins.
The Arab states in terms of Saudi. They're getting their hands across Africa. They're expanding somewhat. They're coming into some political good ties in different parts. The Americans are talking to the Saudis. How do you see the Saudis?
Fascinating. Um, the Crown Prince is certainly not somebody that is interesting in sitting by drinking champagne while there is a civil rights demonstration of 500,000 people in front of his palace. I think his actions have really made that clear. At the same time, I think it's also clear that this is a modernizing Crown Prince.
Mm.
They're going to run out of oil, and he knows it. And so he is moving heaven and earth to put Saudi Arabia into a position in which it economically has a future for its people. And I think he's farsighted. And when you consider the power that the religious radicals, the conservatives, have had in that country, look, it takes guts to do what he did. You know, in that part of the country, leaders get bumped off for doing what he's doing. You know, the Shah of Iran got overthrown because he was a modernizing guy.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that what is going on in Saudi Arabia is a positive thing, and I hope they're successful.
All right. Now, we've been talking for some time, and majority of the audience don't know anything about you, James. Do you mind just sharing with our audience who you are, what do you do?
Well, I've done a lot of things. My mother said I was very confused. I studied at Tulane for undergraduate, and I have a law degree from there. Then I went to Cambridge, England, at Trinity College, and studied law, and got another a piece of paper from them. Cambridge was probably, honestly, the high point of my life. I loved Cambridge, and it loved me. It's a remarkable institution. And then I came home in the middle of my second year to go on active duty because I was an Army officer to go to Vietnam. And oddly enough, in the day before the officers' transportation school ended, they came in and said that they were not going to send us after all. It's funny, I never gave it a second thought, never worried about it. I was curious to see what Vietnam was like. I mean, I was going to go, so there wasn't any point in worrying about it. I was really curious about it. I was very interested in its politics. But they were throwing too many regular Army officers out of the thing, and the last thing they wanted were lawyers like me taking the place of regular Army officers. So I came home to New Orleans and began to practice law and joined a large, prestigious defense firm called Chaff McCall and became a partner there and did a combination of corporate and litigation. I gave up my partnership at the end of 1986 to become a consultant to companies dealing with issue management, crisis management, as well as a political consultant to candidates running for office. And I would say from beginning of 87, mostly until around 2005, did that nationally and internationally. I worked in uh, a number of campaigns, both at presidential campaigns at home and internationally in different capacities. We've done a lot of U.S. Senate races and governor's races and things like that, and had a great time. I enjoy politics; it's fun. I'm not doing campaigns now, but I did them for a long time, and I enjoyed that. But eventually, in politics, you sort of wear out from doing it, and being up close and personal to political leaders makes them mortal. And you see that they're human just like everybody else. They put on their trousers one leg at a time. And you do get tired of it, I have to admit. Uh, and then 9/11 happened, and I was invited to give advice to the Pentagon because of my expertise in campaigns and information. And I loved it. I'd always been interested in that. And so I've really devoted most of my time to that. So that's sort of one track of things that I've done. I'm also a writer, although that's really become, frankly, more since I turned age 60. I've published 7 nonfiction books, mostly dealing with national security, all well acclaimed, I'm proud to say. And all not making a lot of money because they're written for a professional audience. Uh, I have a completely separate set of writing interests, which you're aware of, uh, in theater, film, and novels. I wrote a musical comedy that opened in the West End of London this past summer, produced by Tony Award-winning producer Stephen Levy.
Oh, do you
I'm
want to say who
proud
it
to
is?
say,
You want to say what it's called?
sorry?
Do you want to tell everybody what it's called? The actual.
Yes, I will. I'll tell you. It is called The Fabulist, and it is a sort of a hybrid. It is it got rave reviews from critics, I'm pleased to say. It really did. People loved it. A lot of fun. Uh, it i- it's sort of a kissing cousin of operettas, although it's as much of a play as it is music. I wrote the libretto and the play, and the music was composed 200 years ago by Giovanni Paisiello, whom nobody's ever heard of. Paisiello was one of the towering figures now lost to time of the 18th century. And it's based on his short opera, The Imaginary Astrologer, which was written for Catherine the Great. That was her favorite opera, and he was her favorite composer. And his music is utterly delightful, and it's somewhat like Rossini. Indeed, Rossini's Barber of Seville is a redo of Paisiello's Barber of Seville. Paisiello's is not so great. Rossini's, of course, is. And his music is sort of a cross between Rossini and Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's very accessible and delightful. And but I completely reset an 18th century story in a movie studio in Italy, in Tuscany, in 1929, just after the Mussolini had signed the Concordat with the church. And it has two parallel themes. It's called The Fabulous because top magicians call themselves fabulists, not magicians. And they would say the uh,
Okay.
top magicians would argue that magic is just a different route to the same truth as science. And one must always remember Arthur C. Clarke, who said that any sufficiently advanced technology is magic. And Einstein said that if you don't believe in magic, you're dead. And so one theme of the play is the competition between science and magic. The hero, the main figure in the play, actually is not the magician, the fabulist. It's the woman that he's after, Clarice. And in order to win Clarice, he has to go through all these obstacles to show that his love is true. But he also has to prove to her father, who is a scientist, that his magic is not fraudulent, that his magic is, in fact, equal in merit to science. And there's a lot of magic in the play, and how Julian uses magic to convince the father that he is worthy of the father's respect is a lot of fun. And I think probably is the aspect of the play that critics most enjoyed, although they loved the music. And the productions really was a lot of fun. So that's that, and there are other opera companies that are planning on producing it.
Okay.
I've just finished a novel called the Movie Star, which my great agent Scott Kaufman in New York, head of the New York office of the Buchwald Agency, is just now in the last couple of weeks presenting to publishers. If there are any publishers watching this, I would say to you, you should call Scott. This is a great novel, and it's a hoot. And it's sort of a thriller set in Paris. I've also just finished two screenplays. This is all I write simultaneously, and when I'm writing, I don't do anything except that, which is called UFOs. And I can't talk about it at all, other than to say that I find the subject endlessly entertaining. I'm an agnostic on the subject, but it'll be produced by James Dwallaby, who was head of production at Paramount, and we're highly optimistic about it. I've done another script, which is called National Lampoon's Counterintelligence. And Cal McChrystal is probably the finest director of comedy, and very flattering. He says he thinks this is the funniest comedy he's ever read. And James is going to produce that as a film. So my interest in writing, as you can see, is going off in that direction. And I enjoy having those two aspects to my life. I think you have to do different things and excel at them in order to stay sharp. So I love people, but I love the work that I do, and it's a lot of fun.
So what
One
did you,
hopes you can make a contribution while you're doing it.
James, what did you find out about UFOs?
It's such an amazingly interesting question. Oh,
Yeah,
'cause
isn't it?
I'm an agnostic on whether there are any, but so this is what I've found in open source and some other sources that I won't talk about. I mean, number one, nobody seems to really know what we're dealing with. If you would put a gun to my head, I would say the 52 F-18 pilots who saw tubular-shaped UFOs, or what the Pentagon calls UAPs, and they have gun camera footage of that. You can see that on the internet. Uh, I would bet you anything they have high definition footage of these things that they're not disclosing. I don't know that, but that's what I would bet. The question, I mean, the performance capabilities of these things is beyond belief. And when 52 F-18 pilots separately see this and say, we saw these things, it's hard to dismiss the stuff. Now, when you go beyond that, the answer is who knows? I don't think the government has been transparent about what they know. And that may be because they actually don't know anything at all. There is a cottage industry of experts, former military people and stuff that have testified before Congress about unacknowledged special access projects. I mean, that's one group of people. There is another guy named Stephen Greer, the most visible ufologist. You can go on YouTube and see his interviews. Very compelling interview. I have to say for myself, after I've listened to him, I think he's needs to have a drink. And he's probably a good advertisement for making even marijuana illegal. People should not smoke it. I have to say that I'm not buying what he says. He says that there is, in fact, a civilization, interstellar, that we've made contact with, and they're just waiting for us to become mature enough so that they can make contact with us. Great. Okay, good. Would you please show us some specifics of all these? And he talks about all these craft that we have found and recovered. You never hear from him, and he's not in the Pentagon, so he doesn't get to say, oh, that's classified, like these other guys do. He's never pointed to a concrete example. And the people who testified before the House in public all say, oh, we can't talk about that. We can only do that in classified things. Well, congressmen who've listened to him talk in classified testimony have made the same complaints. You know, show me the beef. So I think really the answer is that I think the government ought to be transparent. The government does have some things, and I say that because John Podesta, who was Bill Clinton's chief of staff, has said the government should be transparent. And I just have to infer that Podesta does know something. The other things that are intriguing are that they've only talked about it on late night TV shows. But both Obama and Trump have been asked this question by people like Stephen Colbert. You know, are we hiding
Yeah.
little green men? And what's interesting to me is that it's like they rehearse their answers together. They respond with exactly the same language. No, you know, I haven't met any aliens, but you know, I have heard some very interesting things, but I can't talk about it. Okay, Donald, what haven't you talked about? He has said that he's going to uh, be transparent about UFOs, so I hope that he will, because I'd kind of like to know what's going on. There are three movies including mine, that'll be made on it, and all of them are just completely different. Steven Spielberg has one that's described as a love note to humanity by somebody in the cast. John, Bruckenheimer, very distinguished producer, is making it kind of like All the President's Men kind of movie. I'm sure it'll be
Yeah.
very entertaining. He makes great movies. I won't talk about mine. It's a completely different story that has nothing to do with what they've done, which represents a speculation Uh,
Okay.
but mine is written for fun. Mine's written for you to go pay your money and go see the show and come back and say, "You got to see this show. It was the most fun I've ever had." It is not a docudrama, and it is not an effort to unveil government secrets. It's a although the funny thing about it is my script is rooted in science. Almost every minute of my movie is rooted in what is scientifically true.
Okay.
Uh, Obviously, I don't include UFOs in that thing because who the hell knows what UFOs are? But everything surrounding the story is in fact rooted in uncontested science. I mean, it's not. You know, and I think that's one of the things that makes mine interesting, and it has both an element of thrills to it. A lot of that, of course, it is a thriller, but it also has an intellectual side to it. So we'll see what happens. The movie business is a strange business. I enjoy my writing in that just as I enjoy national security. So I consider myself lucky to have been able to have a career in both of these areas, all
Well,
of these areas.
a fascinating career to say the least. Um, Maybe let me ask you final two questions based on all your experience. Like you said, you've advised political leaders. You're now dealing in the world of theatre and creativity, but that's showmanship. You're talking about the best magicians in the world and how they term their what they call themselves. If I look at leadership today, both in the political field, but also in the corporate side of things, James, how do you define leadership? Is it do I scratch the surface because it is brilliant showmanship? Is it depth for follow through? How do you see real leadership? Because it's at me all day, every day, and it's very different.
In my opinion, leadership starts with character. If you don't have the values of integrity, loyalty, a commitment to excellence, if you don't believe in a cause, if you don't believe, you have to believe that what you're doing is improving the lives of other people. You have to be able to listen to other people and to inspire them to be partners, not employees, with you in a project that you all are doing together. It's the people who can provide that kind of inspirational leadership to a vision that, whether it creates joy, connection, discovery, pride, a better world, all of these things. Leaders do that. They are people who are resourceful and innovative. They're open minded. Uh, and they're curious. They're curious. They want to know what's over the next horizon. And they don't just want to go there, they want to bring all of us with them as a team. And I think that the best leaders measure up to that. And I think it's somewhat of a rare talent. You see it in the military. So in my book, The Corporate Warrior, here's my
Mm,
advertisement. Everybody needs to read my book, The Corporate Warrior. I interviewed a lot of the top generals and got their views on strategy and leadership and applied it to the corporate world. All of them are now in the corporate. And the complementary nature of what people who grow up in industry and people who grow up in the military do is, I think, fascinating. And you can see it in the best of marketing from great companies, from Nike, whose marketing is the best and most sophisticated and most totally inspiring, I think, of any companies. It's true of Apple. It was true of IBM, which had to reinvent itself. It's true of startups like Harry's Razors. These are all people that want to explore a new frontier and want to bring people with them. And so I think that it's really fascinating. A lot of the generals that we have that I know and I've had the honor to meet with and become friends with are very remarkable people. They're people that you just want to follow because you figure wherever they're going, they know what they're doing, and it's going to be okay. You opened the show talking about Alexander the Great,
oh,
who is
yes.
somebody who is one of the more fascinating individuals. And I share your view. Remember, he was only around 30 when he died.
Yeah, 32.
And he, I mean, his innovative tactics in warfare, which seem simple enough today, but certainly caught the Persians and other people off guard, were remarkable. His ability to inspire people to believe that he had a vision that would make Macedonia a greater place, and that what he was doing in exploring new places, that is to say, he was a leader of discovery as much as he was one of vision. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't, I'm going to improve your life. But he said, this is an amazing world that we need to learn more about. And we not only can bring our own civilization to these people, but he was somebody that believed that you would also take from these civilizations. It was a give and take attitude that he had. And I think that's one of the things that probably he inspired. He didn't ask his soldiers to do things that he did not do himself. And so he really was uh, very much of a remarkable leader, just like in a different way. I think that Julius Caesar was. I mean, today in today's world, the people who would be most interested in Julius Caesar would be the International Criminal Court. As you know, Mark Twain. I mean, Caesar killed millions of people. As Mark Twain said, he didn't do it because he disliked barbarians. He did it for the benefit of their widows and orphans. And but it doesn't, in terms of evaluating people in the context of their own times. You know, you look at these people and you look at the challenges that they faced, which were really quite remarkable. But Alexander the Great is a great, and he's great for all of those reasons. I think that he exuded for the people that followed him a character. They believed in him and they believed in what he was doing, and they wanted to be a part of it. Leaders want people to be a part of what they're doing. Reagan was a great president because the people who liked him wanted to be a part of what he was doing. I think that for people who liked him, and we all know his personal problems in his personal life. John F. Kennedy had that same effect. When I lecture, I tend to close my lectures with a film of his 3-minute speech in Berlin, which I, s- I still choke up on when I think about it. But there was a guy who epitomized the idealism of the American spirit at a time of crisis. That's what America is about. And I think that's what great leaders can do. Kennedy was a seriously flawed individual, but he was a learning president. He started off as an absolute catastrophe. But by the time that he was assassinated, he was becoming very competent. And I think a second term by Kennedy would have been really interesting. I don't know what would have happened in that. It's really leadership is an intangible thing. The number of flawed people who become great leaders. Great leaders are not necessarily good human beings. And I think there's something interesting about that. Some of them are just thoroughly rotten human beings. John F. Kennedy, as a person, was not an admirable person. I think that as a president, he was remarkably fascinating. Reagan was, to me, was a great president and fascinating. Franklin Roosevelt, was an utterly remarkable leader. He had no staff. He had to do the things that made him great by himself. I mean, imagine, he knew that unless he got the American people behind him, we couldn't go to war against the Nazis and we would be conquered. He's the one that figured it out. They didn't have a staff meeting where they sat around and said, oh, why don't we try this strategy? Let's take a poll. He did it. And this is a guy who is, not only up in age, but he's crippled.
That's right.
I mean, I walk with a walking impairment because of neurology, and I know what that's like. But, I do very well with it. But Franklin Roosevelt had these heavy steel things. So, and he had to do it himself in an informal setting. Now, Roosevelt had the ability to surround himself with amazing talent. He had these 4 people, Harry Hopkins, the others who were all very remarkable individuals in there, Tommy Corcoran, Francis Perkins, all remarkable people in their own right. And we probably won't see leadership with that model again because times have changed. But when you ask about leadership, the best thing to do is to look at examples of who were really great leaders, and those are some of them. But I'm intrigued that you in the ancient world that you looked to
Alexander.
yeah, because that's a shrewd and insightful choice on your part.
Can I ask you
Uh,
something? The people you've all mentioned just there, communication. They all could communicate. Now, there might have been different ways to communicate. If you look at, where we are today and the volume of communication coming at us, what would be your message to leaders how to communicate now? Because I look at when I send out a note to somebody, I looked back when I first commenced my operations and getting to know senior people like yourself, I'd write maybe a long letter in the old days. Then I'd write a long email. If I do more than 5 or 6 lines these days, it's in the delete box. So what is the art of communication today?
this is what I would say to leaders, and David Petraeus is a great advocate of this. You've got to get the big picture right, number one. You have to make sure that the people that are with you know what you're doing and that they buy into it. You have to oversee the execution of what you do so that it's done properly. And then you have to determine what ideas need to be refined, and then you have to refine them. Petraeus talks about that all the time, and I agree with him. I think that you're looking for a sense of innovation. You're looking for resourcefulness. Again, you need curiosity. You need to be able to listen well. You have to understand that strategic communication is not just words. I define it this way: it's the use of words, action, images, and symbols to mold and shape opinion, to influence behavior, to achieve a defined objective. You have to know what constitutes winning. And once you do that, you know that you need a strategy. Well, you don't just sit down and write a strategy. The first question you have to ask, and it's the one that George Marshall asked in World War II, and that Albert Wiedemeyer, who wrote the Victory Plan, asked, where am I going to find the knowledge so that if I write a strategy, it makes sense? Now, in the case of Wiedemeyer, is a classic example. He had gone to the Kriegsacademy, so he was very familiar with German military thinking. And that was the basis for his writing the Victory Plan, which turned out to be prescient. So number one, you have to get the knowledge. Then you have to have a strategy. Then you have to develop tactics and operations and then metrics. And you have to do all of these things. And you would say, well, all of this seems like 101. But when you look around the world, the absence of thought through strategy for what people do amazes me. Look at Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, he acted purely on gut instinct, reflexively. Xi did the same thing in COVID and with Hong Kong. I understand, behind that was, well, we've got to protect the party. But one can say, well, from your point of view, maybe you didn't make the right decision. So you've got to have an idea of, what constitutes winning. We went into Iraq in 1991, and Bush understood what constituted winning, ejecting Saddam from Kuwait, and then he came home. His son went into Iraq without any definition of what constituted winning, and he wound up in a bog. Obama had no clue as to what he was doing, nor was he particularly interested. Uh, you have to know what it is that you want to accomplish. In that sense, the Iraq 2003 war and the Afghan wars were great tragedies. They cost trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
Think about where this country, the United States, would be today if we had not wasted $3 trillion or $4 trillion on the Iraq war and another couple of $1 trillion on the Afghanistan war. And one of the most shocking things to me about the 2003 war, because I bet people don't know this, is that after 9/11, everybody assumed that the Al Qaeda Shura all went to hide out in Pakistan. Well, it's not true. Do you know where they went?
No, not. I thought they were up in the hills, but where were they?
They went to Iran.
Ah, is that right?
Hatami was the president. You know what Hatami did? He picked up the phone and called Bush and said, I've got the entire military share of Al Qaeda and their families here. You want them? They're yours. And some of the neocons were so stupid that they managed to convince Bush to insult him. Remember, Bush gave this speech to Congress in which he talked about the axis of evil?
Yep.
Okay. Well, Hatami had managed to convince Soleimani to go along with giving the Al Qaeda people to the United States. And then Bush gave that speech. Just forgot her name. Um, a woman from Texas who was one of his political advisors, inserted the axis of evil into the speech for purely domestic reasons, not having a clue about how that would resonate internationally. Soleimani saw the speech and said, I told you we can't trust those Americans, and killed the deal. So we had a war in Iraq we didn't have to have because of political stupidity by people that didn't know anything. It's amazing to me when you look at history, how many tragedies took place because people really did at critical points did stupid things, and how casual decisions have had such amazingly far-fetched consequences. Take Hitler. I mean, thank God Hitler was nuts. Although if you'd had somebody good running Germany, they probably would have won the war. But I mean, the stupidest thing anybody ever did in a war was Hitler declaring war on the United States. We weren't going to go to war with Germany. Had he not declared war on us, we probably wouldn't have gone to war against him. Very casual, impulsive decisions made by people have huge consequences. His decision not to invade England and to call off Operation Sea Lion changed the course of World War II. They could
Yeah.
have conquered England. It was all impulse. The reason that the Germans halted their offensive when the British were holed up at Dunkirk was because the generals were so successful that Hitler thought he'd lost control. So he called a halt to the offensive so that he could find out what they were up to. And he spent about 3 or 4 days doing that, and that's why Dunkirk worked.
That's right.
I mean, all I'm saying is that as you think about events that are far-fetching and have such great consequences, sometimes they are the product of actually very slightly impulsive decisions made by people. Napoleon was guilty of that. Napoleon was a genius at tactics. He was not a particularly good grand strategist. I mean, just going into Russia in 1812, just it's depressing to even read about. That was a different Napoleon than the Napoleon who was at Austerlitz. I think one of the interesting things about Napoleon, I hope I'm not getting too far afield, I just find these things interesting, is that we always think of Napoleon as this fat, rotund guy, balding. Uh, he actually looked more like Errol Flynn at the time that he won all of his great battles.
Yeah.
He just let himself go to seed. Uh, you know, why do people do these things? I don't know.
On that, James, if last question for you then, if you were to look back at that very young man attending university all those years ago before he commenced this outstanding career, what advice would you give him now?
Figure out what it is that you want to do. Where does your heart lead you? And do that. And 100 people are going to give you 1,000 irrebuttable reasons for why it'll never work. And you just have to ignore those and go do them. When I told people I was going to write me, James Farwell, write a musical comedy to be produced on the West End of London, that belongs on a Saturday Night Live comedy script. I mean, everybody laughed. How are you going to do that? I said, I don't know, but I am going to do it. And I did it. And, uh, you know, I've had a great knack of finding people that I can partner with. like James Wallaby, he's my partner on some of my movies. Uh, Wonderful, brilliant man. But I think you need to do that. And the other thing I would do is find people that you can partner with and find a mentor. I didn't have one, but growing up, if you can find a mentor, a really good one, it'll make all the difference in the world in your life and in the choices. So follow your heart, find good people, and do so with a good heart, with the idea that your most important priority in life are your values, and that the most important value of all is a commitment to improving the lives of other people.
On that, James, I can't ask for any more. It's been an absolutely fantastic discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
You have been listening to No Limitations.